signed Executive Order 12977, which outlined new security standards for federal. Clinton signed Executive Order 12977. Clinton signed Executive Order 12977. Clinton signed Executive Order 12977, which outlined new security standards for federal facilities. Those standards were put into action here at the new Oklahoma City Federal Building, just a block away from the memorial. Blast-resistant concrete walls face the street. There's now just a single lobby for visitors, guarded 24/7. To keep the new Oklahoma City Federal Building from becoming a giant bunker, its architects designed an elliptical courtyard with walls of high-tech, shatterproof glass that bathe workers inside with natural light and ensure this federal facility remains inviting to the public it serves. With the Oklahoma City bombing, this Great Plains state found itself suddenly on the front line of a war against domestic terrorists. But preparing for threats to the nation has a long history in Oklahoma. Just 79 miles south of the capital lies Fort Sill, one of just 5 U.S. Army basic combat training sites in the country. Here, soldiers prepare for deployment overseas. During live fire training, Marines learn how to fire howitzers armed with 155mm rounds. And nearby is a U.S. Army urban combat facility. Welcome to Liberty City. Made from old shipping containers, this training site, complete with a building designed to look like a mosque, helps prepare soldiers for situations they might face overseas. Here, soldiers dressed as Middle Eastern men take part in drills, where troops practice searching for terrorists and insurgents hiding in a village. When Fort Sill was established here in 1869, its purpose wasn't to train troops to fight foreign wars. It was a U.S. Army outpost built to protect settlements on the frontier and to control the Native American tribes that the U.S. government considered a threat to white settlers. Over the years, many famous frontier scouts passed through the fort, including Buffalo Bill Cody. But the most famous figure to arrive here was the great Apache chief and warrior, Geronimo. After eluding the U.S. Army for close to a decade, he finally surrendered in 1886 and was eventually brought here to Fort Sill and locked up in the old guardhouse. As settlers had moved on to Native American land in Arizona and New Mexico, Geronimo and his Apache warriors had attacked and raided the new settlements, which made them enemy number 1 of the U.S. government. Legends abound of Geronimo's cunning and bravery. Perhaps the greatest legend of all is said to have happened here at Fort Sill. The story goes that Geronimo was leading the U.S. cavalry on a wild chase across southern Oklahoma when he raced to the top of these hills, known as Medicine Bluffs, and then, daringly, leapt on horseback to the river below, leaving his pursuers in the dust and shouting, "Geronimo," as he plunged. It's a tale that still prompts some U.S. Army paratroopers to cry Geronimo's name when they leap from great heights today. After he was brought to Fort Sill, Geronimo was forced to become a pumpkin farmer here on the grounds of the fort. And he died here too, on February 17th, 1909, nearly 90 years old, reportedly from pneumonia. During his lifetime, Geronimo witnessed the great transformation of Oklahoma. From a land with miles of open expanse that belonged to the Kiowa and other native tribes, to a territory where oil cities boomed overnight, and finally to a U.S. state, just 2 years before Geronimo's death. It was a journey that started in 1830, when Oklahoma was chosen to play a leading role in a painful chapter of American history. A chapter that led here, to Fort Gibson, the end of the line of what would famously be called the Trail of Tears.
Audible is my road trip companion.
Tears.
It's kind of...
The Trail of Tears.
signed the Indian Removal.
India, all new next Wednesday at 8.
President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act into law. It allowed the U.S. government to take Native Americans out of their homes in Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, and other southern states, and relocate them to the West, in Oklahoma. For many, it was a brutal journey. Roughly a quarter of the 16,000 relocated Cherokee died en route. One Georgia soldier who took part in the removal later stated, "I fought through the war between the states, and I have seen many men shot. But the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." The Trail of Tears led here to Fort Gibson. After their arrival, the Cherokee and other tribes were given land to call their new home. The U.S. government had divided most of present-day Oklahoma into more than 24 parcels called the assigned lands, which the government then gave to various Native American tribes. One of those, in northeast Oklahoma, became the new home of the Cherokee Nation. Over the following years, the Cherokee and other relocated tribes worked hard to establish roots on the new land they'd been given. Ever since, Cherokee blood has run deep in Oklahoma. Some of the state's favorite sons are famously part Cherokee, including Will Rogers, Chuck Norris, and even megastar Brad Pitt, who was born in this small Oklahoma town. As clever fans of Brangelina already know, the latitude and longitude that Angelina Jolie has tattooed on her arm will lead you right here, to Shawnee, Oklahoma. Population less than 30,000, but known by millions around the world as the birthplace of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. On December 18, 1963, in a room on the 3rd floor of Shawnee's small ACH hospital, Jane Pitt gave birth to a son, William Bradley Pitt. Actor Brad Pitt is more often associated with Springfield, Missouri, where the family moved after he was born. But what brought Brad Pitt's ancestors here to Shawnee to begin with is a pure Oklahoma story. Like many others, Brad Pitt's great-great-grandfather, William H. Brown, and his wife Minnie, first came to Oklahoma to take part in a single historic moment. A moment when the dreams of thousands of hopeful settlers were fulfilled, and millions of acres of Native American land were given away for nothing. It all started in 1889. By then, most of Oklahoma had been assigned by the U.S. government to Native American tribes, but nearly 2 million acres of unassigned land lay in the center of the state. That year, President Benjamin Harrison issued a proclamation that on April 22, 1889, at noon, these unassigned lands could be had by any settler who was fast enough to grab a 160-acre parcel. 50,000 people flooded into the region. Many lined up here on the banks of the Canadian River, on the southern boundary of the land to be given away. Under the terms of the proclamation, no one could cross the river to claim land until exactly 12 noon. One pioneer named Emma Childers was there and described the scene. All of the men along the South Canadian River got as far in the river as they possibly could without sinking in the quicksand, and there waited for the hour of noon to come. When the clock struck 12, the cannons fired, and the race to claim homesteads and town sites was on. Today, the Centennial Land Run Monument in Oklahoma City captures that exact moment in large sculptures of bronze. All larger than life, the settlers raced wildly across the river in a frenetic fight for the offered prizes. In the north, thousands more rushers arrived. Here, by nightfall, 10,000 people settled in a tiny fly speck of a town called Guthrie. And thousands more soon arrived by train. Trains that were so full of rushers, they were said to look like centipedes as they pulled into Guthrie Station. Within months, this once sleepy settlement became a bustling metropolis, a modern brick and stone city known as the Queen of the Prairie. 1 year after that first land run, Guthrie was made the capital of the new territory of Oklahoma. But at the time, the vast majority of present-day Oklahoma was still Native American land, from the misty Arkansas River in the north to iron-rich Cottonwood Creek, from vast lakes and dense forests in the east to the majestic Glass Mountains in the west. Native cultures had flourished here for thousands of years. The Wichita and Kiowa still called this land home. Land that was wild, beautiful, and free. But that was not to last. Even though the U.S. government had assigned most of Oklahoma to Native American tribes, it would soon take that land away. Starting in 1891, more land runs were held, and steadily, Oklahoma's assigned lands were opened up to white settlers. Within 2 decades, Oklahoma and all of its Indian territory became America's 46th state. Statehood ceremonies were held here in 1907 on the steps of Guthrie's Carnegie Library. During this period, the train helped speed settlement throughout western Oklahoma. And wherever the new settlers made homes for themselves, they began to farm the land. Wheat fields sprang up, reaching to the horizon. For these farmers, it was a time of dreams and hopes for a better life, but that was not to be. Soon the land would turn on them and transform their dreams to dust.
West's most valuable.
Oklahoma is a very, very special state in regards towards the pain and suffering that it took for them to become that 46th established state. And of course, the seal got moved from Guthrie, that was moved down to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, regenerating its new name of the capital being in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. A lot of painstaking moments happened to the Oklahomans that originally began with so many Native Americans, true-blooded Indian people, who loved not only each other but loved their land. It's really so sad towards what the Oklahomans had to go through in 1995 pertaining to the horrible, horrendous homegrown incident that happened with Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. But one of the saddest things about it is the fact that Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, still to this day sticks to its original concept that it was only a truck bomb that caused so much peril and so much horror to the citizens of Oklahoma, knowing good and well that their history lies deeper than just a Ryder truck, that it was something else inside the lower part of that building that caused that kind of devastation that day of taking out 168 people from this earth. It's really sad whenever you go up against certain individuals that is this powerful, that they are so dead set that they want to say one thing knowing that the truth says something totally different. And hopefully one day the truth will be so obvious that the authorities in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma will have to change their course of action and announcing to the world that there was something else other than a bomb planted in a truck that caused the damage to so many people. April the 19th, 2005, which we have just recently went through the 25th anniversary. That is inseparable with the history towards what went on south of there in a little community called Mount Carmel, right outside of Waco, Texas, that connected both states into one.
Travel down any train track in Oklahoma, and you're bound to pass one of the cathedrals of the Great Plains. Grain elevators that tower over the plains. And none compare to these, rising over the town of Enid, north of Oklahoma City. With a combined capacity of roughly 65 million bushels, these are the largest grain elevators in the state, and some of the biggest in the world. Built in the 1920s, Enid once claimed to be the wheat capital of the United States of America, which helps explain why these soaring silos are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Wheat is still the #1 crop in Oklahoma, and it's here where the rich bounty of the Great Plains is safely stored for market. But growing wheat and other crops has not proven to be as easy in Oklahoma as the state's first homesteaders imagined. When the rains are good in western Oklahoma, green fields like these blanket the plains. For the settlers who arrived here in the late 1800s, this region appeared to be the promised land, stretching to the horizon. But Oklahomans have had to learn the hard way that survival here requires a delicate dance with the forces of nature. Flying low over western Oklahoma today, it's easy to see why. Much of it is actually bone dry, thanks to a recent drought. When it gets this dry, plants and grasses are all that keep the topsoil from blowing away. It was easy to forget that in the late 19th century, because the rains kept coming. And so farmers kept tilling the land and planting crop after crop, enjoying year after year of bountiful harvests. What those farmers didn't know was that they were experiencing a small moment in a long cycle of rain and drought. And by clearing more and more grasses that had held the topsoil in place for hundreds of years, they were putting themselves at greater and greater risk. By the 1930s, the rain stopped falling. The land was drying out. And then the wind started to blow. Here in the far west of the state, the town of Guymon, Oklahoma, had already suffered years of drought. Residents prayed for rain at the town's Methodist church, but the clouds that arrived brought dust instead. Storms of dust that they called black blizzards. At the time, dust storms were frequent across a vast swath of the Great Plains. But in 1935, the worst of them all hit the Oklahoma Panhandle. A towering wave of dust raced south towards the cities of Guymon and Boise City. A storm the National Weather Service later described as a massive wall of blowing dust that resembled a land-based tsunami. Residents waited as the black wall approached downtown Boise City. It would be the first of many such black blizzards to hit the region's farms and ranches hard. Cars and trucks stopped working. No one has captured the experience of this time better than Oklahoma native Woody Guthrie. A dust storm hit, and it hit like thunder. It dusted us over, and it covered us under. Blocked out the traffic and blocked out the sun. Straight for home all the people did run. With no crops left in the field and no money in the bank, desperation set in. Oklahomans, for whom this land was all they'd ever known, packed up what they could and fled. Soon, a mass exodus had begun. 2.5 million people from Oklahoma and other plain states fleeing the Dust Bowl. Part of the largest migration in U.S. history. Overloaded cars, trucks, and even wagons streamed down Oklahoma's country roads as migrants made their way to the Mother Road, Route 66, to get out of the state and start their search for a new life. Some would not survive the journey. Flying over the Oklahoma Panhandle today, it's still possible to discover traces of this historic migration. Abandoned farms still stand on the land. Cars still lie swallowed by sand. And evidence of former communities can still be seen on the plains. Here, outside Boise City, the population dropped by 40% as children were pulled out of school. But in the end, most Oklahomans actually stuck it out, holding on to all they had and hoping that another cycle of rain would come their way. Today, many of the children and grandchildren of those hardy souls are still here too. Right next door to abandoned homes are new ones. And people here on the Oklahoma Panhandle still farm the land just as their ancestors have for generations, despite the continued cycles of rain and drought. Recently, this part of Oklahoma has been experiencing a drought even worse than the one that struck back in the 1930s. The effects are visible from the air. The only green to be seen is where irrigation keeps the crops watered. Thanks to generations of trial and error and the use of technology, Oklahomans have learned to survive in the dry and dusty Great Plains. Some have even found ways to have a bit of fun with it. This is Little Sahara State Park, more than 1,600 acres of sand dunes. They tower up to 75 feet over the plains. This vast desert landscape formed over thousands of years, thanks to Oklahoma's howling winds. It became a popular Oklahoma attraction in the 1950s after a nearby town placed a couple of old circus camels here to lure tourists to the dunes. These days, this Little Sahara is an off-roader's paradise. When early travelers crossed Oklahoma, it wasn't the sight of sand that surprised them the most. It was what appeared to be a giant field of snow. In 1811, a group of Osage Indians guided U.S. Army Major George C. Sibley here to north-central Oklahoma. When they arrived, all they could see was a vast white expanse that seemed to stretch on forever, a sight that still inspires awe today from high above. But skim the surface, and you quickly realize it's actually a vast deposit of salt. When Sibley saw it, he called it the Grand Saline, but it's known today as Oklahoma's Great Salt Plains. Once, this was an ancient inland sea. When that sea evaporated, it left behind this stunning resource that covers more than 10,000 acres. Wild animals used it as a giant salt lick, which made it a popular hunting spot for Native Americans. But after news of Sibley's discovery spread, entrepreneurs raced here to carry off wagon loads of this white gold. Throughout the history of Oklahoma, stories abound of the search for treasure, oil, gold, and salt. These days, Oklahomans are tapping a cleaner kind of resource: the power of prairie winds. Just southwest of Oklahoma City stands the Minco II wind farm, built by one of the nation's largest wind developers. Minco II boasts 63 wind turbines, each of which generate 1.6 megawatts of power, enough to run 450 homes. But the power from these windmills isn't headed for television sets and power tools. In fact, every single watt of power from here is being generated for just one customer: Google. Just outside the tiny town of Pryor, Oklahoma, is a little piece of Silicon Valley, the Google Data Center, one of 6 such facilities the company owns across the country. This server farm needs lots of power to keep Google services like the Google search engine, Gmail, and Google Maps all running smoothly. So the next time you launch a search for Brad Pitt, Will Rogers, or simply Oklahoma, the results might just be popping out of this unmarked building. Oklahoma's wins may be helping keep internet users happy, but they also have a much darker side and can devastate entire towns in just minutes.
Some of the worst tornadoes noted has happened in Oklahoma, and it can be ravaging if you're not properly prepared. For that in which what Mother Nature can lash out to the people there in Oklahoma. They're very, very familiar with storms. Same way up towards Kansas. With the winds topping over the Rockies and the humidity and the moisture coming out of Arizona, it can be brutal at times in the great state of Oklahoma.
Central Texas, Tornado Alley covers most of the state of Oklahoma. During the spring, the North American jet stream converges with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico and warm, dry air from the Rocky Mountains. A cocktail that triggers more tornadoes than anywhere else on the planet. Which means there's more risk of a deadly twister hitting Oklahoma than just about any other U.S. state. That's what happened in the town of Woodward on April 15th, 2012, when a deadly tornado touched down here in the dark of night. It ripped a path right through town and demolished homes, businesses, and a trailer park, killing 6 people. The path of Woodward's twister is clearly visible from the air. 89 houses here were destroyed. During this storm, a swarm of 17 tornadoes hit northwest Oklahoma. But amazingly, there were no other deaths. Many credit that to Oklahoma's severe storm warning system, a system that warns residents in advance of a twister's potential path. It's based here at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma.
Which is supposed to be one of the best in the world.
Located on the campus of the state's oldest school, the University of Oklahoma. It was founded soon after the first Oklahoma land run in 1890. But when most people hear University of Oklahoma, they don't imagine looking inside storm clouds. They think football. The Oklahoma Sooners are the stuff of legends. The team holds the NCAA record for most consecutive wins by a major college program, 47 straight. It's also turned out some of the best running backs in the game. Heisman Trophy winner Billy Sims and All-American Adrian Peterson. With such a remarkable legacy, it's easy to have faith in the University of Oklahoma football team. But 100 miles to the northeast, one man's faith was put to the test when God told him to raise $8 million to start a university, or so the story goes. According to televangelist Oral Roberts, he was reading a spy novel when God gave him his orders. Roberts did as he was told, and by 1965, the Oral Roberts University was open for business. Tulsa is where he built it. A 30-ton sculpture of praying hands is the centerpiece of this manicured campus. But the university's architecture is decidedly more futuristic. In the center of campus stands the Prayer Tower, which looks as if it's been ripped from an episode of The Jetsons. But Tulsa is no stranger to architectural risk or architectural wonder. Nestled at a bend in the Arkansas River, Tulsa is the state's second biggest city. It's also an oil town that had a boom of its own when the Glen Pool oil field was discovered in 1905. The city's success in the petroleum industry prompted a huge construction boom in the early 1900s, and Art Deco was the style of the day. The results of that boom still populate the city skyline. But many know Tulsa as the home of the Golden Driller, a 76-foot-tall statue of an oil worker that was named Oklahoma's official state monument in 1979. Today, many oil workers in Oklahoma have a very different job description than in days past. These days, many may never even see oil. That's because it courses beneath their feet, beneath the prairie, from border to border, north to south, in a vast web of oil and gas pipelines that carry raw materials straight from producers to refiners. And the biggest of those pipelines end up here, Cushing, Oklahoma, the largest crude storage facility and trading hub for crude oil on the continent. It's been called the pipeline crossroads of the world. From Cushing, at least 7 major pipelines fan out across the nation and tie into a vast network of pipelines and oil infrastructure that stretches from Texas to Maine to Western Canada. Each tank in these farms holds nearly 250,000 barrels of crude. And counted together, Cushing houses about 10% of America's total oil inventory. To cart all this oil away, you'd need more than 33 million barrels. Maintaining this facility is a gargantuan job. To keep the tanks safe, they're spaced apart so a fire on one tank can't jump to the next. A dike surrounds each tank to contain oil in the event of a leak. But today, Cushing's biggest problem can't be seen from the air. More oil is flowing into this tank farm than flowing out. There's not enough pipeline capacity to keep the oil moving down to Texas ports and Gulf Coast refineries fast enough. That's why companies here are racing to build new tanks that can hold 4 million barrels of crude until the problem is solved. Nearby, miles of pipe have been stockpiled, ready to be laid in the ground and welded together to carry the crude southward. It's not the first time in Oklahoma history that it's proven harder to transport black gold than get it out of the ground. Some things in Oklahoma just seem to stay the same. Take the state's back roads, which have been calling pioneers, adventurers, and cowboys for nearly 200 years. A call that Oklahoma country singer Garth Brooks knows all too well. Brooks has sold more than 128 million albums, which has made him the second highest-selling solo artist in U.S. history, after Elvis. He got his musical start performing here at the Tumbleweed Ballroom in Stillwater, about 70 miles from Tulsa, where Brooks was born, the son of a country singer mom. Brooks paid his country music dues at the Tumbleweed, and he's come a long way since then. Bigger venues and bigger houses. His mansion and ranch in Claremore stand on 9,000 acres. But fans will tell you he stayed true to his humble roots. Just listen to the lyrics of songs like Friends in Low Places, and you'll understand. Roots are important to Oklahomans. The state capitol building in Oklahoma City is a perfect example. The statue on top of the dome says a lot about the heart and soul of this state. A 17-foot-tall bronze Native American warrior called the Guardian. It was sculpted by State Senator Enoch Kelly Haney, an American Indian whose family arrived in Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears 7 generations ago. Rife with Native symbolism, the dignified, muscular figure carries a spear, showing his commitment to stand his ground in a fight. The circular shield represents the circle of life. Inside the circle is a cross and 4 dangling feathers, symbolizing the 4 seasons and directions. Fittingly, the Guardian is the first statue representing Native Americans to be placed on top of any state capitol. Oklahoma is a state of color and contrast, a land where opposites embrace and old cultures meet new. From the great inland sea of tall grass and bison to the red bluffs of the Glass Mountains, Oklahoma has seen the dusty tears of great human migrations, and it's borne witness to the discovery of unimaginable earthly riches. It is a land steeped in wonder and hidden stories. Glide down any dusty back road, and you never know what you'll see. But there is one thing you're sure to find: the true soul of America's heartland.
Oklahoma is an unusual state, and their pain and suffering is not foreign to what that they have had to fight for in the pursuit of happiness in regards towards their livelihood. It's really sad that somebody from Tennessee, such as myself, had to cross paths with the Oklahomans of one of the worst, horriblest events that has ever befallen upon to American soil, pertaining to the tragedy that occurred April the 19th, 1995, with the Oklahomans. When I was led out to that area to bring transparency to that incident, I had no idea that I was going to be judged and degraded for my good works. To this day, after 25 years of mourning and sorrow, the officials there in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, still refuse to acknowledge that the findings that one of their Tennessee natives discovered towards it being something else other than a rider truck, a truck that had a bomb in it, that brought so much sorrow and misery to the state of Oklahoma. As we have stated before and will state again, hopefully one day the truth will be so apparent, the truth will be so obvious, that it will be no longer feasible for the authorities in the great state of Oklahoma to deny that there was more involved with the Oklahoma incident that happened April the 19th, 1995. That there was more other than a rider truck with a bomb in it. To this day, these things still haunt me. Of the courtesy of serving the truth the whole truth, nothing but the truth, to think that these findings are still in denial brings more sadness in my heart, even beyond the trail of tears. And I know that the Native American people that hear that will probably say, well, there's no way that the sorrow of one particular incident can outweigh the sorrow of so many lives. But when you're dealing with the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth, so help us God. In the event of being judged righteously before our God, we know that the truth will set us free, and we know that the truth is the only way of escaping wrath and damnation that can continually haunt people's lives pertaining to the incident that occurred now 25 years ago to the Oklahomans. May God be with us all. May God have mercy on all of us. And may we continue to struggle, to fight for that in which what we know to be right